So I am gene positive for Huntington's disease. So what that means is that I have a mutation or an extension on my Huntington gene, and that causes an overproduction of the protein, Huntington protein, and that essentially over time builds up and it slowly starts eroding or attacking your brain.
How long have you had it for?
So it was actually, it's at conception that you get it. So I've been gene positive my whole life, but the difference between many other genetic conditions and Huntington's disease is that you don't begin showing symptoms until you're like middle adulthood. So I actually don't suffer from Huntington's disease yet, even though I know I'm going to in the future. So yeah, I haven't really faced the actual symptoms myself yet. So probably the way Huntington's disease has impacted me so far is that it's actually from my father. So you get Huntington's by having a 50-50 chance through either your mother or your father. And so obviously it hasn't impacted me personally symptomatic-wise, but my father being symptomatic and therefore passing from the disease has obviously impacted my childhood and I guess becoming an adult as well. So I guess my dad became symptomatic when I was around 12, and he became a bit of a different person due to the changes in his brain. And so I guess dealing with those changes mentally was taxing as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old. And then as his symptoms progressed and he became weaker, unable to feed himself, toilet himself, there was a lot of responsibilities I had to take on as a daughter that not many children would have to do for their father, I guess, especially at that age as well.
So you pretty much got your head wrapped around it pretty quick, even at 12?
Yeah. So my dad was symptomatic or had symptoms for 10 years until he passed away. So for those 10 years it was just progressively dealing with what symptoms were coming on the best we could, I guess. Well, I guess still as I'm not symptomatic, it impacts me, I guess, financial planning, future planning, like setting myself up for the future, knowing that I'm going to become symptomatic one day soon. And I guess as well as my father, he gave me a 50-50 chance and I now have the gene. Any children I have as well have a risk of getting it 50% chance. So I guess family planning as well. I guess in right now, that's the way it impacts me, not in a symptomatic manner yet. I've been in a relationship for nearly 7 years, and in Australia it's recommended you can't get tested until you're 18 to see if you are gene positive or gene negative. And so I'm only 24, so I actually was with my partner before I even went through testing. So I guess for him, he didn't really see it as a problem. He knew my dad, he saw how my dad was. So I guess in that sense, you find someone, I mean, I don't want to be with someone who sees it as a problem, and I don't think many people would. My mum never saw it as a problem. And my mum and dad loved each other a lot. So I guess if it's too big of a problem for someone, then they're not the right person to be with. That's the way I've kind of looked at relationships. I think I'm a very wise person, but I think in also saying that I'm the complete contrary, I'm also a bit erratic because I feel like, I have to do things now because I'm going to run out of time in the future. So yeah, I think it's made me very wise, but also very erratic. I guess the biggest challenge of being gene positive is dealing with the fact that 40 years has automatically, or 30 years has automatically been like cut from your life. I guess growing up you think, I'm going to live to 80 or I'm going to live to 70, but when you're given a gene positive result, you kind of, it's like, I might live till 50, I might live till 40, I might live to 60. It's a real unknown, but something that is known is that your life will most likely be significantly cut short. So I guess it's dealing with the fact that I've got to deal with and do things that I want to do kind of now, Otherwise I won't get a chance to do them. So I guess dealing mentally with that is the biggest hurdle and thing I've had to overcome since finding out I was gene positive. Well, I guess I'm not very smart when it comes to money, even though I wish I was. But I guess on a day-to-day basis, I don't second guess really anything I buy or spend money on. But I guess with bigger purchases like a car or a house, it really makes you second guess, am I going to be able to pay this off? Is it worth spending all this money on a nice car when I can rather go and go overseas and make good experiences? So I guess that's the way I look at things. I really make good decisions long term, but short term I'm a bit of a spender. I think just due to the fact that I'm not symptomatic yet. For Huntington's, there's not really many treatments. The treatments that there are available is just more to make your life comfortable, but there's actually nothing to stop it or slow it down. So I guess financially, there's nothing that I have to output in regards to treatments, although there is really significant improvements in research, and researchers are currently working on a thing called gene silencing, which is where they inject a medicine into your spine or somewhere in your back, and it actually mutes the gene. And so they're trialling that overseas and in Australia, I think. And that is going to cost a significant amount of money. So I guess that's something as well that you look into, and I guess when it's available, you want to be able to access it regardless of the price. So since I've become gene positive, I have had a little bit to do with the health system, but more in terms of participating in trials and research. So once a year I go and see a neurologist and researchers through a research called HD Enroll, and it's basically just a database of thousands of people, both who are gene positive and the control, which is people who aren't gene positive. And they just study your movement, your walking, your eyes, your memory, things like that. And they are basically trying to find a protective gene that might protect against HD. I guess it's to also combat the gene. Yeah. Yeah, I found it really easy to access information, and I guess I've found it easy because I've also sought it out. I think if I was in a position where I was a bit negative towards the condition and didn't want to really know much, then I don't think much information would come to me. But because I've really sought information out and I've wanted to be a part of, I guess, a change in the community, then I've found a lot of information both through Huntingtons Victoria. There's a foundation called Huntingtons Disease Youth Organisation, and they're really good at simplifying information. So, common day people can understand all this scientific language and studies that are coming out. And so, yeah, I found that really good to access, and that's the way I've found a lot of information. So my family actually made a decision to keep my dad in the family home as he was only 48. And a lot of people in his situation, for various different reasons, have to access nursing homes and living facilities as they don't have the equipment and support to keep their family at home. But we made a decision as we were able to keep my dad at home safely and happy and healthily as much as we could. So we did that. And so we kept it at home and we accessed supports. I guess we were able to access the NDIS, which was new at the time, and we were able to get a lot of, equipment to use at home, which made the stay at home even accessible for him. And then I guess we accessed help through private neurologists who obviously looked after my dad's condition and offered knowledge and support on, I guess, medications and different kind of therapies that might support him. I think with Huntington's, it's it's an illness where I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about it. I mean, in history, there was a lot of misconceptions about the root of it. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions, and I guess secrecy. I found in a lot of families, I guess being through Huntingtons Disease Youth Organisation, I've met a lot of people my age who come from families who it's very secretive. And I'm not sure if that's across the board with genetic conditions, but I know with Huntington's disease, a lot of people are very secretive. And so I think in the medical world, trying to access help, it's not a very well-known disease. And even if people know the name, they don't really know kind of what it is and what it contains. So when we needed, I guess, support, medical, physical, anything like that, I guess it was more us chasing them up. I guess sometimes in the medical field you can feel a bit like a number. So I guess just on the day-to-day basis it would have to be us contacting them if we needed help or support. I think it's easy for them to feel like it's just another day. So I think you definitely feel a bit like that sometimes. But I think for the most part, the specialists and the doctors and I guess anyone who's working with people with a disability, they definitely try and show empathy when they can, but I guess they also have to stay professional. I think there was one experience with my dad, and he was in the hospital and he couldn't eat, he couldn't swallow anymore. He was choking on everything, and so he was losing a lot of weight fast. And so we took him to the hospital, and there was one doctor in particular who was certain that he wasn't eating due to depression. And it was pretty hard to get around to this doctor that my dad had never had depression and that he didn't have depression. He was very happy, quite, even though he was in the end stages of his disease, and that it was actually his disease progress that was stopping him from being able to eat. And so that was one example of a really challenging time that we faced as a family, I guess, of not being believed. Yeah. I would say that we didn't get much support. Mostly, I guess by keeping him at home, we cut some ties that would maybe potentially be there if he was in a home. I guess the consistency of seeing the same specialist and the same medical team by being in a nursing home or like a shared living facility, I guess that's something that we didn't have by having him at home, is that we kind of became the main I guess, social workers, for lack of better words. And so I guess in that hospital stay, there was a lack of support going home, and I guess why we were there as well, because we were just kind of another number. I guess just a lack of knowledge of the disease. I mean, we had a neurologist who'd studied for God knows how long, and then had a person with a typical neurological condition, and they were standing there telling us that my dad had depression. So it was very disappointing, that particular situation. So through NDIS, my dad was eligible to get a carer in every day. So they were able to come in and shower him every day, and they were able to, I think he had roughly 1 or 2 hours a day that he could access. And so that gave, I guess, my mum a break, who was his main carer, to go out and, maybe grab lunch with a friend or get a coffee or even just walk our dogs, I guess. So that was maybe something that kept her feeling okay with herself. And I guess the physical toll of showering and dressing and another adult definitely was something that took a toll on her. So I guess being able to access the personal carers was something that really helped as well. And they were very lovely as well. They were very caring. So I'm mainly a part of an organisation called HDO, which is it's a global group of young individuals who are aged between 18 and 35, I think. 12 and 35 maybe, and it's people who are impacted by HD. Either their families, like their immediate parents have it, their aunties and uncles have it, maybe their cousins have it, grandparents, maybe they're at risk, and like me, had a parent with it, but I'm also gene positive myself. And what they do is they offer they have a website which offers kind of portals for each age group, and it has information on HD and dealing with HD and living with HD that's appropriate to each kind of age stage within that 18 to 35-year-old. And they also have camps around the world most years. So they recently just had 2 in Queensland, which was for Australian and New Zealand young people. And then they also have a North American one and a European one. And you basically go for 3 days and they pay for everything, as finance is commonly a difficult thing with families with HD. So they fly all the young people to the camp and pay for the accommodation. And it's basically 3 days of age-appropriate seminars, I guess meeting people who are in the same situation with you, just making relationships with people your age who are going through similar things. So that's a really awesome organisation that I've been a part of. It definitely made an impact on how I felt towards the situation and the condition, I guess. I think my main concern would be, particularly with HD, is that most of the support groups, they're very outdated. They're for like older people. Even when my mum and dad went a few times, they said people just go and complain and they want to access like the main medicine, which isn't available yet, which is their right to do. But I guess for young people who aren't really dealing with the symptoms themselves yet, those aren't really appropriate. So I guess that's where HDO comes in and is really, really appropriate, is it never focuses on the negative. It's always positive. How can we get through this? So I guess that's one thing I'm concerned about support groups, is that they're not age appropriate. But I guess that gap's kind of been filled. I think a good support group would definitely be somewhere where you can meet people the same kind of age group and situation as you. And I guess one that facilitates kind of open discussion, so one that's less structured. So I've been to a few support groups and it's a very rigid schedule, and it's very hard to just make, I guess, common ground with people there, as it's just kind of a speaker. Whereas I think a good support group kind of opens and allows time and schedules time to kind of just hang out and chat maybe about what your common ground is. So from my understanding, which I could be incorrect, is that it is almost impossible to find a life insurance that will cover you once you know that you are HD positive, purely because you know you're going to die early. So I guess they want to steer away from that. Yeah, so my father was genetically tested in 1994, which is the year that they actually discovered the gene. So he was well beyond 18 by that point. And so he was already working, he was a senior computer analyst at National Australia Bank. So he was already working there and already kind of under their cover that they kind of automatically give all their workers. So he was very well protected his whole life by them, right until the end. Pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, which essentially means you do the normal IVF process that someone with infertility would do, and then they create the embryos, and then once the embryos are old enough, they test them genetically, the same test that I would have had at 18 years old, and they disregard the ones that have HD, and then they implant one that doesn't have HD. So you can have a child who can grow up knowing that they won't have HD. And so basically we can eradicate HD for the next generation. We can rid the earth of the disease. But the only problem is to do one round of this, it costs around $10,000. And that's just for one round. You might not get pregnant on the first round. And so something my family was passionate about is that every Australian with HD, or potentially other conditions with a 50-50 chance of carrying it on, should be able to access this technology for free, because it just makes sense. Wouldn't we want to rid the disease? So what my family did with Huntingtons Victoria was we made a pledge to the government. So we actually made a video similar to this one, about what PGD is and why it helps HD and why it should be available on Medicare. And so we made the video and we put a petition online and we pledged it to the government. And they knocked it back twice and saying that it wasn't suitable to be on Medicare, it wasn't suitable to be paid for by the government, and it wasn't something they weren't really, interested in. And so we put it in a third time and they finally agreed that it was something that they were interested in, but Medicare wasn't the suitable way to go for it. And so they're currently working on some kind of, way that they can fund the PGD and IVF for people with HD. And as the current time of today, I haven't heard anything further. So that's something my family is really passionate about, is that we don't have to have HD in the next generation, but it's inaccessible to most people who are also trying to pay off their home loan, fill in their super, pay off everything and work out their life before they're 35 and become symptomatic. So we did a bit of statistical research, and for the 10 years that approximately someone lives from diagnosis to death, from symptomatic diagnosis to death with HD, it's roughly 10 years, and it roughly costs the government a bit more than $100,000 per individual. But for them to cover the IVF, it would be roughly $10,000. And we're not the first ones in the world to try and access this. New Zealand offers people with HD 1 round of IVF for free to all New Zealand citizens. So we're a bit behind.